Y'all, let me get into the light. Y'all, we need to talk about Isaiah Bradley. Hold on, let me get y'all set up because we need to talk. We need to have a conversation. So, for those who are not watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I don't know why you're not, but that is your own thing. There was a character introduced in that show named Isaiah Bradley. If you're a Marvel Comics fan, then you already knew who it was. I am not a comics fan, so I did not know who he was. But as the story goes, Isaiah Bradley is now recognized as the first Black Captain America. And in this show, we only seen him one time up until the most recent episode, episode 5. Sam Wilson, who you know as Falcon, actually went to see Isaiah Bradley and I guess either give him or show him the Captain America shield. And it led to Isaiah Bradley and Sam Wilson having this really deep conversation about Black men, in particular in regards to Captain America. And flat out, Isaiah Bradley told Sam Wilson, this country will never accept a Black Captain America. We also got some good backstory, you know, because we found out in the first episode that he was featured in that Isaiah Bradley had actually been in prison and experimented on for 30 years of his life after he had done something. We did not know what he done. What he had done up to that point. So we find out that he actually was imprisoned because after taking the super soldier serum, he went into a prisoner of war camp and basically rescued his entire team and brought them back. And he was arrested for it. He was arrested, imprisoned, and experimented on for 30 years. And the telling thing about that, and I think the whole reasoning for the conversation was so that Sam could understand, Isaiah Bradley got arrested for that and experimented on. Because of that, Steve Rogers became officially a part of the government as Captain America for doing the exact same thing. In Captain America, I believe, the first Avenger, Steve Rogers went against orders, went out by himself, and rescued, I believe they called them the Howling Commandos. So Steve went out, saved how many ever hundreds of troops, and when he came back, he was rewarded, and he was, you know, really seen as Captain America versus Isaiah Bradley, who did the exact same thing as Steve Rogers, got imprisoned and experimented on for 30 years. And I think it's the reason that we need to have this conversation is because there are a lot of people out there who believe that this show and ultimately this country does not have a race problem. Even though this show points a big light at this country's race problem, everyone who has worked on the show has come out and said this show will tackle themes of racism. And there are still people out there who say, oh, it's not about race, and why are you making it about race, and this, that, and the third. The conversation between Isaiah Bradley and Sam Wilson was not even superhero to superhero, I don't think. And I don't think a lot of their interactions have been based on that, superhero to superhero. they've been solely based on, I am a black man talking to a black man. We as black men are having this conversation. And with everything that's going on in the world right now, I think it is a conversation that needs to be had. I applaud Marvel for actually putting that conversation to the forefront with one of their main characters in one of their main storyline properties. I applaud them for doing it, because it's a rough conversation, it's a tough conversation, but it is a conversation that needs to be had. And I want to relate that conversation to a podcast that I just listened to today. My friend, one of my great close friends, his little brother did a podcast about his feelings as a 23-year-old black man in this country as we deal with the Derek Chauvin trial for the death of George Floyd, as we also deal with the death of Daunte Wright. And the reason I feel like the parallel can be made is because a lot of the things that this 23-year-old black man was saying were the same things, or at least very closely related to being the same things that Isaiah Bradley said to Sam Wilson. There's a lot of people who say that there doesn't need to be a conversation about race and things like that. Y'all, we need to have this conversation. There needs to be open dialogue about these things, because if there isn't, we don't learn, we don't grow, we don't get better. And I've gotten to the point in my personal life where I'm over having the conversation. I tried to have the conversation years ago, and I've learned that you can't explain things to people who will not hear you. If people are flat out set on not hearing you or understanding you, you can't have a conversation with those people. There are people right now who do not want to have the conversation of why we as black people feel that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. There are people who don't want to have the conversation of why we feel that Daunte Wright's killing was unnecessary and an injustice. Just like there are people who don't want to have the conversation of Isaiah Bradley's mistreatment and why Isaiah Bradley flat out said this country will never accept a black Captain America. He literally did the exact same thing as Steve Rogers and got arrested for it. Now, how often do we see that in today's world? Black people do less, much less than some white people have done. And they're dead, and these white people are alive. Most of the mass shootings that have happened in this country in the past, I don't know how many years, have been perpetrated by white men. Most of them have been captured alive. Versus, he paid with a fake $20 bill. He was selling loose cigarettes or CDs. She was aggressive during a traffic stop. She was in her home playing video games with her nephew. She was in her home asleep. He was playing with a toy gun. He was walking home with Skittles and an Arizona iced tea. We need to have a conversation about Isaiah Bradley. And we need to have a conversation about race in general. We need to have this conversation.